All right, so today we're going to take a deep dive into Australian student visas. It seems like it's supposed to be getting harder to get one, but the numbers are going through the roof. What gives?
It really is a bit of a head scratcher. You'd think with all the talk about, tightening immigration and the government really trying to put the brakes on, we would see, fewer student visas being granted. But the opposite is happening.
It's almost like if you think of a balloon you push down in one spot, it's just going to pop out in another.
Yeah, a perfect analogy. And
Yeah.
and to add to the intrigue, this is all unfolding, with a federal election coming up.
hmm
And this issue of migration is a major talking point.
Yeah, that's going to be a political hot potato for sure.
Yeah.
But can we back up for a sec? Just how big is the surge in student visas that we're talking about?
Yeah, well, let's just say the numbers are pretty eye-popping. Back in November, the Sydney Morning Herald reported a record high of almost 17,000 student visas granted to university students applying from overseas. And this isn't just some random spike. The trend has been steadily upward since the middle of last year.
Wow, that's a lot of students. So if the government is trying to reduce the number of student visas, what exactly have they done?
Well, since about December 2023, they've rolled out a series of policy changes that, at least on the surface, look like they should make it tougher to get a student visa.
Okay, give me the rundown. What kind of changes are we talking about?
So first, they increased the financial requirements for applicants. Students now have to provide even more evidence that they can afford to live and study in Australia.
So it's like an extra layer of financial scrutiny. But wouldn't that also make things harder for students who might genuinely need financial aid, but are still great candidates?
Yeah, that's a really valid point, and it's definitely one of the criticisms that's been raised.
So what else did they change?
Well, they also doubled the visa application fees. I mean, those fees were already no joke, so doubling them is definitely going to make people think twice.
Ouch. Yeah, that would sting. It's almost like a pay-to-play situation, which doesn't seem entirely fair.
And then the final piece of the puzzle is this reprioritization of visa processing, which has unfortunately led to a lot of delays and even more visa refusals.
So we've got tougher requirements, higher fees, A&D processing delays. You would think that would be enough to slam the brakes on the number of visas being granted. But it's not working, is it?
Nope, not at all. What we're seeing is this kind of tug of war between the government's efforts to sort of control the flow and the sheer determination of students to get to Australia.
Yeah, I guess the allure of studying in Australia is pretty strong. But what's driving this massive backlog of appeals against visa refusals? The Sydney Morning Herald said it's more than doubled in just 5 months and is over 20,000 for the first time ever.
Yeah, it's a testament to how badly students want to study in Australia. They're willing to fight for it. And a lot of times they're winning those fights too. Two-thirds of those appeals are being overturned.
Wow, that's a pretty high success rate. Makes you wonder if there's a disconnect between the initial visa assessments and the appeals process. Maybe the criteria are too strict or being applied inconsistently.
It definitely raises some questions about how the system is working. And it's not just appeals. Students are coming up with other kind of creative ways to stay in Australia longer.
Okay, spill the tea. What are they doing?
Well, some are enrolling in new courses to basically reset their visa clock.
Oh.
It's a bit of a loophole. But, hey, if it works.
Clever. I can see the appeal of that.
And then there's a trend that's raising eyebrows and prompting some serious debate. An increase in asylum applications from students.
Hold on, students seeking asylum. That sounds pretty drastic.
It is. And the numbers are significant. Since the middle of 2024, we've seen the monthly average jump from about 300 to 450 applications. And by August, it hit 516.
So to put that in perspective, is that a lot compared to previous years?
The last time we saw figures this high was after the Tiananmen Square massacre back in 1989.
That's a sobering comparison. It really speaks volumes about the level of desperation some students might be feeling. So amidst all of this, the government decided to replace Ministerial Direction 107, which was a pretty controversial policy, with a new one called Ministerial Direction 111 in late December. What was the thinking behind that?
Well, the stated goal was to streamline visa processing. Try to clear the backlog and make things more efficient.
Sounds good in theory, but has it actually worked?
The jury's still out on that one. Some people say it's helped speed things up, but others are claiming it's actually slower than before.
So more confusion and uncertainty. No wonder educational institutions and agents are pulling their hair out.
Yeah, it's definitely creating anxiety. They're left wondering what other changes might be around the corner and how that will impact their operations, especially those institutions that are nearing their international student caps.
Yeah, it's a real balancing act for the government, isn't it? Trying to weigh the economic benefits of international education. against concerns about, housing and immigration levels. Yeah, it's like they're walking a tightrope, trying not to tip too far in either direction. On one hand, international students bring in, billions of dollars to the Australian economy. They support jobs, they add to the cultural richness of the country.
Absolutely. And let's not forget the fresh perspectives and ideas they bring. To classrooms and research labs, they're really a vital part of the academic landscape.
Totally. But on the flip side, you can't ignore the concerns about the strain on infrastructure, especially when it comes to housing.
Yeah, that's a real issue, especially in major cities where the rental markets are already super competitive. A sudden influx of people can really put pressure on an already tight situation.
Yeah, and that's where the political debate heats up, right? The opposition is seizing on this,
Right.
claiming that the government's policies are, making the housing crisis even worse.
It's a potent political weapon for sure. But let's not forget that these are real issues impacting everyday Australians. It's not just a game of political football.
So how do you strike that balance? How do you attract international talent without overwhelming existing systems?
That's the million-dollar question. And there's no easy answer. Some folks argue for stricter caps on student visas to try to control the inflow.
Right, like putting a limit on how many people can come in at once.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Others are pushing for more investment in affordable housing and infrastructure to accommodate the growing population.
So build more housing, expand public transportation, basically make it easier for everyone to live here regardless of where they're from.
Right. It's about taking a more holistic approach and addressing the root causes rather than just, slapping on Band-Aids.
It sounds like a long-term strategy is needed, not just quick fixes.
Absolutely. And it's not just about numbers either. We need to think about the quality of the student experience. Are we providing enough support services? Are we ensuring ethical recruitment practices? Are we creating an environment where international students feel welcome and valued?
Those are all super important points. It's not just about bringing students here, it's about making sure they have a positive and sustainable experience while they're here.
Couldn't agree more. Now let's shift gears for a moment and talk about the students themselves. What's driving this unwavering desire to study in Australia, even with all the challenges?
Well, for starters, Australia has a stellar reputation when it comes to education. I mean, our universities consistently rank among the best in the world.
Yeah, that's definitely a major draw. A degree from an Australian university holds a lot of weight internationally. It opens doors.
Plus, let's be real, Australia is a pretty amazing place to live. It's safe, it's welcoming, the quality of life is high. And, oh yeah, did I mention the beaches and the incredible natural landscapes?
Those are definitely perks. But I think there's also something to be said for the perceived opportunities that come with studying here. For many students, it's seen as a pathway to potential immigration.
Right. The post-study work visa options are a huge incentive. Students can gain international work experience and maybe even settle down in Australia permanently.
Exactly. And this ties back to the government's dilemma. They want to attract skilled workers, but also manage migration levels. It's a tough needle to thread.
Speaking of tricky situations, let's circle back to the increase in asylum applications from students. What's your take on that? I mean, it's a complex issue with a lot of ethical considerations.
It certainly is. On the one hand, seeking asylum is a fundamental human right, and we need to show compassion to those fleeing persecution. But on the other hand, there's a valid concern that the system could be exploited by people who are just trying to sidestep immigration rules.
It's a sensitive topic, and it's important to approach it with nuance and understanding. We need to ensure that genuine asylum seekers are protected, while also making sure the system isn't being misused.
Absolutely, finding that balance is crucial.
So where does this leave us? We've got record-breaking student visa grants a massive backlog of appeals, concerns about housing and immigration, and ethical dilemmas surrounding asylum applications. It's a lot to process.
It really highlights the multifaceted nature of international education. It's not just about classrooms and textbooks. It's about economics, politics, sort of dynamics, and human rights. It's about navigating a world that's becoming increasingly interconnected, with people seeking opportunities and a better life.
And it's a story that's still unfolding. The choices we make today will shape the future of education and migration for years to come. We've been talking a lot about the specifics, Australian student visas, the policies, the challenges, the ethical considerations. But I kind of want to take a step back now and look at the bigger picture. What does all of this tell us about the global landscape of higher education?
Yeah, I think it reveals a few key things. First, the demand for international education is incredibly resilient. Even with, rising costs and bureaucratic hurdles and all this talk about tightening immigration, students are still flocking to places like Australia. They're clearly willing to invest the time, money, and effort to pursue educational opportunities abroad.
It's almost like they're saying, we're not going to let a little red tape stand in the way of our dreams. They see the value of an international education, and they're going for it.
Exactly. And this brings us to the second point. Countries like Australia are really wrestling with this question of how to balance their desire for, global talent with the need to manage migration flows and address domestic concerns.
It's that tightrope walk we were talking about earlier.
Right. And finally, I think this whole situation throws a spotlight on the ethical side of international student mobility. We need to be talking about things like access and equity and the potential for exploitation.
Yeah, it's about recognizing that these aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. These are real people with hopes and dreams. And we have a responsibility to make sure the system is fair and that students are treated ethically.
Couldn't agree more. Now let's kind of shift gears a bit and think about the potential ripple effects. What could this all mean for the future of Australia's education sector?
Well, if these trends continue, we could see Australia becoming even more reliant on international students, which, as you pointed out earlier, could have both positive and negative consequences.
Exactly. On the plus side, it could solidify Australia's position as a global education powerhouse, attracting top talent and fostering innovation.
Yeah, it could also create more diverse and vibrant campuses, which would really enrich the learning environment for everyone. I mean, who doesn't want to be surrounded by people from different cultures and backgrounds? It just makes learning more interesting.
Absolutely. But we also have to be mindful of the risks. Becoming overly dependent on a single revenue stream could make this sector vulnerable to things like global economic downturns or sudden policy changes.
So diversification is key. Just like with any investment portfolio, you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket.
Exactly. And then there's the potential impact on domestic students. We need to make sure that they're not being squeezed out or disadvantaged by this influx of international students.
That's a really important point. Policymakers and institutions need to think carefully about how to ensure a level playing field for everyone.
Right. And we can't forget the geopolitical context. In a world where, countries are competing for talent and influence, international education becomes a strategic asset.
It's almost like a soft power tool, right? Attracting bright minds from around the world can enhance a country's reputation and global standing.
Precisely. So as you can see, it's not just about visas and enrollments. It's about global competitiveness, economic growth, and the future of nations.
Wow, we've really covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We explored the ins and outs of the Australian student visa situation, the challenges and opportunities it presents, and the broader implications for our higher education and global mobility.
And we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to unpack. Like the impact of international students on the Australian economy, the ethical considerations of student recruitment, the lived experiences of students themselves.
It's like peeling back the layers of an onion. Each layer reveals something new and interesting, and that's what makes this topic so fascinating.
It really is. And for our listeners out there, I encourage you to keep exploring these issues. Challenge assumptions, dig deeper. Engage in thoughtful conversations about the future of international education.
Yeah, don't just take our word for it. Do your own research, stay curious, and form your own informed opinions.
Because in a world that's becoming increasingly interconnected, understanding these issues is more important than ever.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into the complex and ever-evolving world of student visas in Australia. Thanks for joining us on this journey. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep exploring.